So this is the Pixel 6, the regular version. And for anyone who saw my review of the Pixel 6 Pro, you'll know that that was the phone I was using right before this one. And so that made for a very interesting experience, switching directly from what is the more expensive, more feature-rich variant of the Pixel 6 lineup to the still premium, but definitely more budget-friendly variant. And I've got to say, it's been a very eye-opening and even surprising month using this phone, and I've been chomping at the bit to share my thoughts with you. So let's dive in. As always, we'll start with the design, and without question, this phone looks very similar to the 6 Pro. In fact, from the back, the two phones are nearly identical, with the only real discernible difference being that the top section of the regular Pixel 6 is about 30% smaller. But despite it being a little shorter, the phone still feels nearly as hefty. So if you're a fan of big phones, great, but if you're used to a more compact form factor, well, this one will still take some getting used to. Now, that said, the phone actually feels quite a bit different in the hand thanks to two key design differences. Firstly, these matte black rails along the side of the phone. On the 6 Pro, you get shiny rails, which actually makes the phone feel a little too slippery in the hand for my liking. And so I've really appreciated having a matte finish for the rails on the regular 6. But then the second design difference is the flat display. As we all know, Google opted for a curved display on the 6 Pro, I guess to emulate a really premium design language. But from a functional point of view, a flat display always makes for a much nicer experience, both in regards to holding the phone, but also in regards to using it, or at least that's what I think. And so, save for the glossy finish on the back, I've actually found that this phone feels very similar in the hand to the Pixel 4 XL from a couple of years ago, which was one of my favorite phones of all time in terms of how it felt in the hand. I actually complained about the size of the Pixel 6 lineup in my review of the 6 Pro, but in all honesty, the flat display and matte rails have seriously improved how this phone feels in the hand. And I know the bezels are a fair bit thicker compared to those found on the 6 Pro. I'm not really too sure why Google wasn't able to make them as small and consistent as they did with last year's Pixel 5, which also had a flat display. But despite this, in terms of design, I actually prefer the regular 6 over the 6 Pro. Except for one thing. So this speaker grill on the regular 6 is actually just ever so slightly bigger than the one on the 6 Pro, and it's resulted in this thing collecting a lot of dust, and it's borderline impossible to clean as well. As well as that, as I mentioned in my review of the 6 Pro, I really do wish Google had opted for a matte finish on the back of this lineup rather than the glossy finish we actually have. Gee, they got close to smashing the design of the regular Pixel 6 out of the park, but if a phone has a glossy back, it definitely loses a point in my books. Thankfully, once again, channel sponsor Dbrand is here to save the day, and they just released their brand new leather lineup of skins, which I pleaded for them to send my way, which they did. And so I'm now rocking a black leather skin for the bottom section of the phone and this beautiful tan leather skin for the top section. And boy, oh boy, does this combo look damn sexy. And even more than that, the phone feels so much better in the hand now. No more fingerprints, no more slipperiness, just a beautiful matte finish that looks and feels incredible. They also have a stack of other options to choose from on their website, like this beautiful white marble and black leather combo I'm rocking on my 6 Pro. So if you want to pick up your own set of skins from Dbrand, check out the first link down in the description below, or head to dbrand.com/Sam Beckman. All right, with design out of the way, let's just quickly chat about haptics. And one of the things I mentioned in my review of the 6 Pro was that whilst the haptics were excellent, they were just a little too in your face. And I kid you not, as soon as I booted up the regular 6 and started using it, the first thing I noticed were the haptics. They still felt incredible, but they were a little more subtle. And to be honest, they reminded me of the amazing haptics we had back with the Pixel 4 flagship lineup, which until now, in my opinion, has been unmatched in the Android world. So for me, the haptics are actually better than the Pro version, thanks pretty much exclusively to their subtlety. And I don't know if it's my imagination or what, but I've actually also found the fingerprint sensor on the regular 6 to be ever so slightly more reliable compared to the 6 Pro as well. And what's given this away for me is that I've found myself thinking about it less. With the 6 Pro, anytime I unlocked the phone, I was always getting frustrated with the fingerprint sensor, but with the 6, it really hasn't come to mind much at all. Now, it's still not blazingly fast or up there with Xiaomi's and Samsung's top-end phones, and I really wish Google would add a face unlock feature just using the selfie cam, perhaps via a software update, which might actually eliminate most of the issues I have with the sensor. But either way, the fingerprint sensor on the Pixel 6 is still somehow definitely a step above the 6 Pro. And for anyone wondering about the speakers, to my ears at least, I reckon they actually sound better than the more premium 6 Pro. But you can let your ears do the talking. Okay, from there we turn to the display, and this is the first real downgrade compared to the 6 Pro. Instead of a 120Hz refresh rate, the regular 6 has a maximum refresh rate of 90Hz. Let me be clear though, the only times you will actually notice this difference is in one of two scenarios. Either after you first switch from using a device with a 120Hz panel, or if you're actually using the phone next to a device with a 120Hz panel. And let's be real, how often are either of those two scenarios actually taking place? So after a couple of hours, honestly, I really didn't notice the difference anymore. And to me, 90Hz has still felt really smooth. Now, do I wish that they went with a 120Hz panel? Of course, but 90Hz is honestly still good enough for a phone I'm using every day, so I'm assuming it'll be good enough for you as well. Aside from that though, it's just as bright as the 6 Pro's display, and it actually has better off-axis performance with less of that blue shift as you tilt the phone. In other words, whilst not the brightest on the market, it's still a pretty great display. And what you might lose out on in regards to fluidity thanks to the 90Hz downgrade, I think you definitely make up for it in spades in regards to battery life. My experience with battery life on the 6 Pro was about average. Not bad, but not great. But for some reason, battery life on the regular 6 has been far better. I'm getting through every single day, no problems at all. And in fact, with light use, I've been ending some days with around 60 to 70% of battery left, which is really impressive. So if battery life is a big priority for you, man, this phone is actually a really solid performer. And speaking of performance, the phone has the same in-house Tensor chip as the Pixel 6 Pro, and so accordingly, the experience of using this phone has been virtually identical. Very snappy, very fluid, and even the same bugs. Yeah, that one kind of surprised me as well. So that issue where the display clocks itself down to 60Hz without rhyme or reason, it's also been happening on the 6. And that occasional stutter of the keyboard, yep, that also happens as well. And I've actually had a new bug with this device where once or twice a day, my notifications will, for some reason, stop making sounds and they will only return after a reboot. Super weird. So obviously we're still waiting on fixes from Google for each of these issues, but aside from that, it has actually been a really solid performer. I think a lot of what makes it feel so good though is actually thanks to the software. I covered this in a lot of detail in my review of the 6 Pro, so I'm not going to go into as much detail in this video, but the long and short of it is that with the introduction of Android 12, Google has implemented all of these beautiful yet subtle animations system-wide that just make using the phone a true joy. Now, if you're wondering how I managed to pull off this slick home screen setup, which looks nothing like the default Pixel launcher, well, that's actually because I'm using a third-party launcher called Launcher 12 in combination with an app called QuickSwitch. And if your phone is rooted, this app allows you to set any supported third-party launcher, which right now is only Launcher 12, as the default home screen launcher. This means it gets full access to the gestural navigation system, meaning all of those super fluid animations remain intact, and the recents page feels as smooth as it should. The cool thing is I've actually managed to root the Pixel 6 whilst also simultaneously being able to use Google Pay and an app called Service New South Wales, both of which are normally broken on a rooted phone. So as someone who loves customization, thanks to that and to the developers behind Launcher 12, I've actually enjoyed the software experience of the Pixel 6 more than the 6 Pro. But let me stress, that's not the 6 Pro's fault. It's only because I couldn't be bothered rooting that phone as well. All right, the last thing we need to discuss are the cameras. And for me, this is where you really see the difference between the regular 6 and 6 Pro. Now, firstly, we do still have the exact same improved 50 megapixel main sensor that we have on the 6 Pro, which can capture phenomenal images and videos in pretty much all lighting scenarios. In fact, when it comes to daytime shots, it's probably my favorite main lens on the market right now. We do also have the exact same slightly underperforming ultrawide lens, which is far tighter than most other ultrawide lenses on the market, as well as a bit softer as well. But the two key differences compared to the 6 Pro in regards to the camera configuration are firstly the lack of a telephoto lens, and secondly, that inferior selfie camera. Now, when it comes to the photo side of things, you can kind of get part of the way towards feeling like you've got a telephoto lens thanks to Google's super res zoom technology, although it'll never really get close to the real thing. But for me, the big downside is when you switch to capturing telephoto videos. As someone who has 2 kids, often playing in the backyard or at a park several yards away, I really do like having the option to capture quality videos using a telephoto lens, and that's just not simply an option on the regular 6. So that's definitely a letdown for me, but then the selfie camera is also far worse compared to the one found on the 6 Pro. For one, it doesn't have that ultra wide field of view, which I really do love having on the 6 Pro, but it's also a fair bit softer as well. Post-processing can improve things a fair amount, but then when you switch to filming videos, it's actually capped to a max resolution of 1080p, whereas the 6 Pro can capture 4K selfie videos. Now, I can get over the selfie camera, it's really not that big of a deal for me, but the lack of a telephoto lens is definitely something I personally miss. That said, I can see why Google omitted it to make sure there were just enough differences between this phone and the 6 Pro. But what I'd love to see in the future is Google adding an additional zoom lens on their Pro lineup, like a 10x lens, and then adding in, let's say, a 3x lens on their regular lineup. That would be amazing. As for all of the other specialty camera features like Magic Eraser or Action Pan, they're all still here, and I covered them in detail in my Pixel 6 Pro versus iPhone 13 Pro camera comparison video, so I'll link that up in the cards and down in the description below. But look, telephoto lens or lack thereof aside, whichever way you put it, for me, the regular Pixel 6 really is a contender for phone of the year. It's got a fantastic build, top tier haptics, a really great display, and the software experience is unparalleled. The main camera is also one of the best you can get, but more than anything, the price is phenomenal. You really cannot get a better phone at launch for the price that this one was at launch. And so, in all honesty, if Samsung and Apple and other brands don't follow suit with the launch price of their phones in a similar tier next year, then Google deserves to take the crown in this pricing category. And if they do match Google's launch price, then we can all be very thankful to Google for essentially forcing their hands. Either way, if you're in the market for a new phone at about this price category, unless you desperately want a telephoto lens, well, the Pixel 6 is a phone I have absolutely no issues recommending.